We looked at angles in all of the quadrants and determined which trig ratios were positive and negative in each of those four quadrants. But what about the angles that aren't really in any quadrant, right? Those angles are actually known as quadrantal angles, right? They're not actually in any quadrant, and it makes sense that those angles would be angles like 0 degrees, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, 270 degrees, and then so on and so forth, right? You go back to 360 as you just continue to wrap around. So if we draw a picture for this, for these angles, right? Let's say we have our axes, right? Let's take a look. So if you have 0 degrees or 360 degrees or whatever you want to call it, right? You can't even form the right triangle, right? So this point here is still x, y, but in this case, y is 0. I didn't go up or down, so it's x0. And since I couldn't even form a right triangle, this is not only one of the legs of the right triangle, but this is also like the hypotenuse, right? So this is really the same as r0. So x0 and r0, when theta is 0, are really the same point. And then when you have 90 degrees, what happens? Now I didn't go left or right at all, so x is 0, but I went up y. And now in this case, r is the same as y, so this point is not only 0y, but it's 0r. And then at 180 degrees, you have the same scenario that we had with 0 degrees, right? Where you didn't go up or down at all. So you just have x0, which is the same as r0. But here the only distinction is x is a negative value. So r is actually negative x in this case, right? So we'll get to that shortly. And then one more down here, 270 degrees is similar to 90 degrees, right? So here you have 0y, which is the same as 0r, right? The length is y and r, but they just have opposite signs because y was negative there. So what this is going to tell us now is when we're at 0 degrees, the sine of 0, right, it's going to be 0 over r, because it's y over r, which is 0. The cosine of 0 is going to be x over r, but remember what we said, x and r are the same, so it's really just x over x, which is 1. And the tangent of 0 is going to be y over x, so it's going to be 0 over x, which is 0. So at 0 degrees, the sine is 0, the cosine is 1, and the tangent is 0. But then when we get to 90 degrees, we have the sine of 90, right? It's going to be y over r, but y and r are the same here, right? So it's going to be y over y, which is 1. The cosine of 90 is going to be x over r, but x is 0, so it's 0 over r, which is 0. And the tangent of 90 degrees is going to be y over x, but it's going to be y over 0, which is undefined. So the tangent of 90 degrees is actually going to be undefined, right? So the sine of 90 degrees is 1, the cosine of 90 degrees is 0, but the tangent of 90 degrees is undefined because you can't have a 0 in the denominator. We looked at 0 and 90 degrees, and now the thing to keep in mind with 0 and 90 degrees is there were no negative values involved. So once we get into 180 and 270, now we're going to have some negative values involved, right? So when we're dealing with 180 degrees, right, remember x is going to be a negative value. So the sine of 180 degrees, sine is y over r, but here y is 0, so it's just 0 over r, so that's 0. So the sine of 180 is 0, but now the cosine of 180 degrees, right? X is a negative value, so really we went left. R is not really equal to x, it's really equal to negative x. So what we have is actually x over negative x, which is going to be negative 1, right? And then the tangent of 180 degrees is y over x, but it was 0 over x. So it's just 0. So the tangent of 180 is 0 degrees. All right. And again, that's the reason for that is r was really the opposite of x. It wasn't the same as x because x was negative. And then a similar thing is going to occur in the 270 degrees, right? Sine is y over r, but in this case, y is negative. So r is really the opposite of y. So when we do sine of 270, we're really doing y over negative y. So we get negative 1. The cosine of 270 degrees is going to be x over r, but x is 0. So it's just 0 over r, which is 0. And then the tangent of 270 degrees is going to be y over x. But in this case, again, x is 0. So it's going to be y over 0. So again, this is undefined. All right. So these are the trig values of these special angles that we call quadrantal angles.